Every step, every sound, every breath, monitored. When a death row inmate moves in Texas, it's not just a transfer, it's an operation. Locked doors, coded radios, armored escorts, and silence. Few people have ever seen what really happens when Texas moves its most dangerous men. But today, you will. Before we begin this journey inside America's most secret prisoner transfers, subscribe now to Behind Bars TV, where real stories of control, power, and survival come to light. For most Americans, the idea of death row ends with the image of a small cell and a ticking clock. But in Texas, home to the nation's most active death penalty system, that's just the surface. Beneath it lies a logistical labyrinth designed to keep execution machinery running smoothly and invisibly. The system beneath the sentence. Texas maintains its death row at the Polunsky Unit, a high-security prison near Livingston. Here, more than 170 men await execution under some of the harshest conditions in the country. But every so often one of them must move, to a court hearing, a medical visit, or the Walls Unit in Huntsville, where the execution chamber sits. And that's when the machine begins to move. Unlike routine inmate transfers, death row movements are classified operations. Even correctional officers in the same facility often don't know when they'll occur until minutes before. Everything is timed, coded, and compartmentalized, need to know only. Code Black, movement in motion. In the early hours of a Texas morning, a coded message goes out over the radio. Code Black Alpha. It's not a riot, not a fire. It's the signal that a death row inmate will be moved, and the prison shifts into lockdown. Corridors clear. Doors lock. Guards line the hall in full tactical gear, carrying AR-15 rifles and ballistic shields. Even within the prison, the atmosphere changes. Inmates fall silent. Everyone knows what's happening, even if no one says it. From cell block J to transport bay, the inmate is ordered to kneel, hands behind his back. 3 officers enter. 1 for restraint, 1 for observation, and 1 for lethal force if needed. The procedure is mechanical: ankle chains, belly chain, handcuffs, double lock. A supervisor verifies every lock twice. Body cameras roll. Only then does the prisoner leave his cell, stepping into a hallway he may never walk again. The sound of his chains echoes through the unit, metallic, rhythmic, final. Every officer watches in silence. No one speaks unless required by procedure. This is not a routine escort. It's a ritual of control, perfected through decades of practice. Operation Red Line. Before dawn, the convoy assembles at the rear sally port. Each transport vehicle is checked by bomb-sniffing dogs. A perimeter sweep clears the route. Only a few correctional officers know the destination, and even fewer know the timing. The convoy typically includes lead and trail units with armed officers, a central transport van with a cage-secured interior, and backup communication support from the warden's office. Each vehicle carries an armed tactical officer, trained for both riot response and emergency extraction. Their job is not just to deliver the prisoner, but to ensure nothing unpredictable happens between Livingston and Huntsville. The secrecy behind the transfer. According to internal Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ, policies, rarely discussed publicly, death row transfers are scheduled with unpublished timetables, and routes are occasionally changed mid-journey to avoid interference. Even highway patrols are only informed minutes in advance. The secrecy isn't paranoia, it's precaution. In 1984, a near-escape attempt from the Ellis Unit led to a complete overhaul of death row movement protocols. Since then, every escort has been treated as a potential escape scenario. Even the prisoner's lawyers often learn about transfers after they occur. Destination: the Walls Unit. When the van finally reaches Huntsville, it enters the Walls Unit, home of the state's execution chamber. A red brick fortress surrounded by high iron fencing and watchtowers. The moment the gates close behind the convoy, a call goes out to Austin. Subject delivered. The operation, sometimes lasting just a few hours, involves over 30 personnel, coordinated communication across 3 divisions, and strict federal documentation. Each transfer represents the intersection of law, logistics, and human life. A system engineered to function without error, without emotion. The human element. And yet, behind every transfer order is a human story. For the officers, it's another mission. For the inmate, it could be the last sunrise he'll ever see. Inside that van, the air is thick with more than heat. It's the weight of mortality. He knows where he's going. The officers know too. But no one speaks. The only voice is the hum of the engine, carrying a condemned man toward his fate. Before a single death row inmate ever moves an inch, months, even years, of preparation shape the men and women tasked with handling them. In Texas, where the execution pipeline runs with machine-like precision, every correctional officer assigned to death row movement undergoes what insiders call the protocol of silence. It's not just about training, it's about conditioning, a system built on discipline and fear. Inside the Polunsky Unit's training wing, recruits destined for death row duty are not ordinary guards. They are handpicked from across the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for psychological endurance, loyalty, and absolute emotional control. The average guard can manage 100 inmates. A death row officer manages just one, but that one could be a convicted serial killer, a cop killer, or a man who has already killed behind bars. The standard academy training lasts 6 weeks, but death row transport certification adds another 8 weeks of field and tactical immersion. Every recruit must master double and triple restraint systems, 2-officer escort formations, silent hand signal communication, rapid reaction drills during ambush simulations. They train under the watch of senior officers who remind them, the moment you speak, you break the protocol. Why silence? Because in a death row transfer, words can be weapons. A glance, a phrase, or even a tone of voice can shift the balance of power, and in this environment, power is everything. Inside the Academy of Control, new recruits learn inside mock corridors, exact replicas of Polunsky's death row pods. One section of training involves controlled chaos drills, where instructors play the roles of inmates shouting, resisting, or pretending to collapse during escort. The guards must respond without a single verbal command, relying only on gestures, body cues, and formation awareness. They are also trained to recognize the psychological tactics inmates might use. Feigning medical distress to disrupt timing. Starting conversations to test the guard's reaction. Observing escort routines to identify weak points. In these simulations, the smallest mistake, even turning your head to answer a question, earns a demerit. 3 demerits and you're out. As one veteran instructor told the Houston Chronicle in 2020, we don't train guards. We train walls. Mental armor, the human cost. Yet beneath that discipline lies something darker, emotional corrosion. Former transport officer Michael Capps, who left the TDCJ after 15 years, described it bluntly in a 2019 interview. You start to shut down. You don't think of them as people anymore. You think of them as packages that might explode. Officers are forbidden from discussing details of movements outside official briefings. They can't talk about the inmates they escort. They can't mention destinations, times, or even emotions tied to the process. That silence seeps into their personal lives. Many suffer from sleep disorders, marital breakdowns, and post-traumatic stress. A study by the University of Texas Institute of Behavioral Science, 2017, found that correctional officers working in high-risk units like Polunsky or Walls had suicide rates 3 times higher than other TDCJ staff. And the primary reported factor? Emotional suppression during high-stakes operations. Weapons of procedure. Every death row operation depends not just on the people, but the tools they wield. A typical officer's loadout includes Kevlar vest with trauma plates, sidearm with rubber rounds. Lethal weapons are used only by perimeter units. Expandable baton. OC spray, used only under supervisor authorization. 2-way encrypted radio with silent code signals. Each piece of equipment is checked and documented before and after every mission. Even a missing cuff key can trigger an internal investigation. The phrase weapons of procedure comes from TDCJ's internal manuals. It means that the true weapon is not the gun, it's the system itself. Procedures are designed to remove emotion, remove error, and replace humanity with mechanical control. When a condemned inmate moves, the system has already calculated every possible scenario, from heart failure during transfer to civilian vehicle interference on the highway. There are backup routes, standby ambulances, and coded dispatch lines to the nearest sheriff's department. Every second is accounted for. The transfer simulation. In one of the final phases of training, recruits experience a full-scale dry run. A mock inmate, usually another officer, is placed in full restraints. The team must execute a complete simulated transfer from Polunsky to the mock Walls unit. They rehearse cell extraction, vehicle loading, route radio communication, emergency pullover response, and controlled entry into a replica execution chamber. Any misstep, a delay, a loose chain, a failed communication code, is analyzed. Mistakes aren't punished immediately, they're replayed again and again until they vanish. Instructors tell them. You'll never remember faces, only procedures. That's the point. The line between control and conscience. For officers, the hardest lesson isn't physical, it's philosophical. How do you reconcile your duty with what you're actually doing? Every time a death row inmate is moved toward Huntsville, everyone in the chain knows what comes next. The closer they get to the walls unit, the more silent it becomes. Officers stop joking. The radio chatter dies down. By the time the convoy reaches the gate, no one speaks at all. That silence, drilled into them during training, becomes the soundtrack of Texas death machinery. It's not fear. It's not hatred. It's ritualized detachment, the emotional armor of a system that must function without compassion to survive. It's 2:47 a.m. on a Friday morning in East Texas. The world outside Polunsky Unit sleeps under the weight of humidity and silence. But behind its electrified fences, a secret convoy is already alive. Engines hum. Radios click. A condemned man's name appears on a clipboard, next to a red stamp that reads, "Move authorized." Tonight, the machinery of death is in motion. Blueprint of a convoy. Every Texas death row transfer follows the same basic formation, refined through decades of tactical evolution. The structure looks like this. Led vehicle, scout unit. A black, unmarked SUV with 2 tactical officers. Purpose: clear the road ahead, identify potential ambush points and monitor traffic behavior. Transport van, primary unit. Reinforced steel cage interior. Dual compartments, one for the inmate, one for 2 armed officers. Doors can only be unlocked with a digital key code synchronized to central command. Rear escort, guardian unit. Another unmarked SUV with tactical response team. Equipped with spike strips, rifles, and encrypted communications. Purpose: secure the convoy from behind and react to any pursuit or interference. Shadow vehicle, supervisory command. Usually driven by a lieutenant or warden. Follows at variable distance, coordinating with the TDCJ Operations Command Center in Huntsville. Each movement is tracked in real time using encrypted GPS signals, viewable only by top TDCJ administrators and state law enforcement liaisons. No civilian tracking system or public database records the convoy's route. Once the gates of Polunsky close behind it, the entire transfer exists in bureaucratic shadow. The prisoner's cage. Inside the van, the inmate sits in a compartment smaller than a closet. His wrists are shackled to a belly chain, and his ankles are linked by a steel bar. A secondary restraint, a short chain connecting his wrists to his waist, limits movement to mere inches. He cannot scratch his nose, wipe sweat, or shift much at all. Air conditioning vents blow directly onto his face, keeping him alert and uncomfortable. This is not a kindness, it's a safety measure. Fatigue dulls the senses and the system wants him awake, alert, predictable, manageable. A thick steel partition separates him from the officers up front. A small surveillance camera above his head records continuously. If he so much as coughs, it's logged. For the officers, the rules are clear. No conversation. No personal remarks. No reaction to anything the inmate says. Even if he pleads, mocks, or threatens, silence is policy. The road to Huntsville. The convoy takes Highway 190, weaving through stretches of pine forest and oil towns. Lights stay low. Radio chatter is reduced to coded check-ins every 20 minutes. Alpha 1 rolling clear. ETA 90. Copy, maintain black route. Each checkpoint call goes through a hidden command line at TDCJ headquarters. Civilian authorities, including local sheriffs, are only notified after the convoy passes their county line, minimizing leaks or disruptions. This road has carried hundreds of men toward the end. It's said that even the asphalt remembers the silence. Officers never stop for food, gas, or restrooms during the journey. Every vehicle leaves fully fueled. If a tire blows out, a Delta event, they switch instantly to the spare convoy vehicle trailing several miles behind. Every possible variable has already been calculated. Inside the officers' minds. For the men driving the van, the trip is both routine and surreal. One officer later recalled in an interview for Texas Monthly, 2022. "You're escorting someone to die. You don't say that out loud, but you feel it. The whole van feels it." The drive from Livingston to Huntsville lasts less than 2 hours. But psychologically, it stretches like eternity. No music. No idle chatter. Only the rhythmic vibration of tires against the road, and the occasional crackle of a coded radio signal. Some officers say they memorize landmarks along the way, a water tower, a diner, a billboard, not for orientation but to remind themselves they're still part of the living world. Arrival at the Walls Unit. As dawn begins to tint the sky, the convoy turns onto 12th Street in Huntsville. Here stands the red brick fortress of the Walls Unit, built in the 1840s, the oldest prison in Texas and home to the execution chamber. The convoy's sirens stay off. No crowds. No reporters. This isn't a spectacle, it's an operation. At the final gate, the lead officer radios in. Alpha 1 arrival confirmed. Transfer secure. The warden of the Walls Unit, wearing a crisp white shirt and solemn expression, signs the death row custody transfer log. The inmate is escorted through 2 locked gates, down a narrow hallway lined with bulletproof glass. This hallway has a name among the guards, the Green Mile of Texas. It leads to a holding cell adjacent to the execution chamber, a sterile room with pale green walls and a single gurney. For the inmate, this is the last stop. For the officers, it's the end of the route, but not of the memory. The paper trail. Every movement, from the moment the inmate's cell door opened at Polunsky to his entry into the Walls Unit, is logged in triplicate. TDCJ Transport Manifest, Officer Logs. Custody Chain Record, Warden Signatures. Operations Dispatch Summary, Digital Time Codes. The documents are sealed in state archives, accessible only to senior TDCJ officials and legal auditors. They read like sterile numbers. Departure 2:47 a.m., arrival 4:36 a.m., no incidents, inmate accounted for. But between those lines lies the unseen truth. Dozens of lives synchronized around one man's final journey, all so that the process remains invisible to the public eye. Beyond the walls. After the handover, officers exit the gate, load back into the convoy and head out the same way they came. They don't speak during the drive back. No one celebrates the mission. They simply drive, past pine forests, past quiet towns, back to the security of Livingston. By sunrise, they'll file reports and eat breakfast in silence. By noon, they'll go home to families who will never know where they were that night. Because in Texas, death row movements aren't just secret, they're sacred in the most chilling sense of the word. By the time the convoy gates close behind them, the condemned inmate has entered a world that exists outside of time. A system with one purpose rehearsed over generations, to carry out the sentence of death in total order and silence. This chapter explores that invisible corridor between arrival and execution, the final mile of Texas death row process, where the line between man and machinery vanishes completely. The holding cell, death watch begins. Once the inmate is received into the Walls Unit, he is placed in a small concrete cell, 12 feet by 6, just 15 steps from the gurney room. This cell is part of what prison staff call death watch. It's here that inmates spend their final 36 to 48 hours alive. The cell itself is stripped of all comfort. No television. No personal items beyond a Bible or Quran. No metal objects. Even the bed frame is welded to the floor. Every 15 minutes, an officer walks by the small window, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and records a timestamp in the death watch log. Cameras run 24/7. Every sound, every movement is archived. The inmate is allowed 3 visitors during this period: family, legal counsel, and a spiritual advisor, but never at the same time. Even these meetings take place behind glass, through a phone receiver, under the eye of an armed guard. It's routine, mechanical, but beneath that routine lies immense psychological tension. Officers describe it as being trapped in a room with silence that breathes. The countdown ritual. When the clock hits 6 p.m. on execution day, the entire Walls Unit shifts into a different mode. Staff call it Protocol Phase Green. Every door inside the death chamber wing is locked. Non-essential personnel are cleared. The warden signs an internal memo titled, Execution Procedure Initiated. 3 teams go into motion simultaneously. The escort team, responsible for removing the inmate from the holding cell and escorting him to the gurney. The witness coordination team, tasked with seating the victim's family, the press, and state officials. The medical team, consisting of 2 certified technicians who will prepare the 4 lines. At this stage, everything runs with minute-by-minute precision. No word is wasted. Every action is documented. A former TDCJ official described the process to the Texas Tribune, 2019. "We don't rush and we don't delay. We follow the clock. The law demands precision, not emotion." The final walk. When the time comes, the inmate's door opens with a metallic groan. 2 officers enter. One reads the final movement order. The other applies fresh restraints, wrist cuffs, ankle chains, and a leather belt across the chest. He is escorted by 4 officers down a 30-foot corridor leading to the gurney room. On either side of that corridor, the walls bear faint marks, scratches from decades of cuffs brushing the same route. Inmates rarely resist at this stage. Most walk quietly. Some whisper prayers. Others mutter to themselves. A few look up, meeting the eyes of the guards escorting them, as if to remind them that for a brief moment, both are still human. When the escort reaches the door of the execution chamber, the inmate is unshackled and laid on the gurney. Leather straps bind his arms, chest, and legs. The 4 lines are inserted into both arms, one primary, one backup. From above, the fluorescent lights hum, constant, sterile, unforgiving. The room of 2 worlds. The Texas execution chamber is divided into 2 rooms separated by thick glass. On one side lies the inmate restrained. On the other, 2 groups of witnesses watch. The victim's family usually seated in silence. The inmate's family or spiritual advisor, behind a separate pane. The small window at the far end connects to the warden's office, where the official phone line to the governor is located. Until that phone rings, the process continues. A 2020 Houston Chronicle report described the room as a place where the air feels too still to breathe. Every sound, every sigh, becomes history. The moment before. Minutes before the injection, the warden leans over the inmate and asks one question. Do you have any final words? Some inmates use this moment to apologize. Others to curse. Some remain silent. Their words are written verbatim in the final statement log, a public record maintained by the TDCJ. As of 2025, over 580 statements are preserved online, ranging from remorse to rage to pure silence. Once the statement ends, the warden steps back and nods to the medical team. At 6 p.m. the injection begins. The 3-drug sequence. Texas has used several drug combinations over the years, but the most common since 2013 is a single dose of pentobarbital, a fast-acting barbiturate that induces unconsciousness and respiratory failure. Earlier methods involved a 3-drug cocktail. Sodium thiopental, to induce sleep. Pancuronium bromide, to paralyze muscles. Potassium chloride, to stop the heart. The process usually lasts 8 to 12 minutes. The inmate exhales one final time. The heart monitor flatlines. A medical officer checks for a pulse. Then the warden declares. Time of death, 6:21 p.m. The curtains close. The witnesses rise quietly. The family of the condemned leaves through one door, the victim's family through another. 2 separate worlds forever divided by one act. After the curtain falls. But the operation doesn't end there. The body is removed within 30 minutes and transported to the Texas State Morgue in Huntsville. If no family claims the remains, they are buried in the Captain Joe Byrd Cemetery, the largest prison cemetery in the United States, where over 3,000 unclaimed inmates rest beneath small white crosses. Officers who participated in the execution are immediately debriefed. Their reports are filed, their weapons turned in, their radios collected. Then they go home, often in silence, carrying invisible weight. A retired warden once admitted to ABC News, 2016. You don't forget their faces. You don't dream about them, but they stay with you. You carry a part of that room forever. The machinery of death. What makes Texas unique isn't just its history of executions, it's the efficiency with which it carries them out. No state in America has executed more people since 1976. The machinery runs with bureaucratic precision, but behind that precision is a paradox. A process built to eliminate chaos, yet haunted by the humanity it must suppress to function. For officers, lawyers, and witnesses, the final mile is not just a corridor, it's a burden of memory. The system demands silence, but silence is never truly empty. It echoes long after the lights go out. Every transfer, every procedure, every silent mile in the dark. They all lead here. To a locked room in Huntsville, Texas. Where human judgment meets mechanical precision. The world rarely sees what happens behind those red brick walls. The paperwork is clean. The roads are quiet. And by sunrise, another file is closed, another name erased from the ledger of the living. But for those who stood inside, the guards who walk the corridor, the nurses who hold the fore, the wardens who give the final nod, the silence never really ends. It follows them home, into their sleep, into the years that come. Because the true cost of capital punishment in Texas isn't just measured in lives ended, but in souls changed, both inside and outside the walls. So next time you hear about a death row execution, remember the convoy at 2 a.m., the coded radios, the trembling silence. Every movement, every breath, every click of the chain is part of a ritual older than memory, one that turns men into shadows and silence into law. If this story opened your eyes to the reality of Texas death row, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next investigation into the hidden machinery of America's prison system. This is Behind Bars TV, where the truth about justice, power, and control is never left in the dark.